Beautiful dreamer, wake unto me. Starlight and dewdrops are waiting for thee. Sounds of the rude world heard in the day, lulled by the moonlight, have all passed away. Beautiful dreamer, queen of my song, list while I woo thee with soft melody. Gone are the cares of life's busy throng. Beautiful dreamer, awake unto me. Beautiful dreamer, awake unto me. Beautiful dreamer, queen of my song, list while I woo thee with soft melody. Gone are the cares of life's busy throng. Beautiful dreamer, awake unto me. Beautiful dreamer, awake unto me.
Hello and welcome once again to the Dr. Zeero Free Magic Secret Show, where we investigate all forms of magic. And one of the things I talked about previously on this show was literary magic, rhetorical sorcery, using language to present a magical vision. And there is an author I would like to promote on this show. And, he's famous to begin with. He's well known, but not as much as he once was. The thing is, you're not going to learn about him in high schools. You're going to learn about him in college, pretty much. And he got pegged with the reputation of being like a dirty writer, basically. And it's because his works were banned all over the world and in America for nearly 40 years. And he was so far ahead of his time that he changed the entire course of literature in the 20th century, to be honest. And the thing was, he ended up getting famous in his late 60s, early 70s is when he started to get really, really big. And we're talking about Henry Miller. Okay, so this is not the playwright Arthur Miller. We're talking about Henry Miller. And what I'm going to do today is read an excerpt, which is the beginning, I think, of one of his finest books. Dr. Zeero personally finds it to be one of the best novels by any American in the 20th century. I'm talking about Tropic of Capricorn. It's the sequel to his more famous book known as Tropic of Cancer. So before I jump into that, let me just tell you a little bit about Henry Miller, right, and why he's important. Is that he basically was the first author who wrote a book in the style where he was the main character and that he was like the star of his own movie. And not only that, you were getting a cornucopia of like psychology and philosophy, and he was trying to unveil himself like the complete portrait of the whole man, right? And it's sort of like with Hunter S. Thompson, he did gonzo journalism, right? So like it's basically gonzo journalism is sort of like taking what Henry Miller did and applying it to the field of journalism, right? And so Henry Miller is the first guy who really did this ever. There's another guy that you might have heard of called Saline that his big book also came out like maybe like a month before Miller's first big book. And they were both in France at the time. And Saline is like similar, but he's nowhere near as amazing, right? And Saline's a Nazi anyway. He turned into a traitor to the French, like when the Nazis invaded and became a Nazi sympathizer guy, like dealing with him, blah, 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 blah. But that's Saline. So he's kind of a rat bastard. But Henry Miller here. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about him. So his deal was he was from Brooklyn, New York, born in 1890, I believe. And he lived in New York until he was nearly 40. And then he kind of like ran away to Europe in the middle of a midlife crisis, not because of the Great Depression. He was able to get around because he was like a street dwelling, weird sort of anarchist guy. And he was, couch surfing and sleeping outdoors. And he just went all out bohemian, homeless artist guy. And basically, after he ran away to Paris, and then after being homeless for 4 years in Paris, living like that, he sat down and he put out his first book. It came out in 1934, right? And it was just it's reading like something that's so personal. It could be like a journal, you know what I mean? But it's intense. So the point is the book was filled because he's a guy who used to hang out with, brothels and the seedier sides of life, all kinds of weird characters that he'd get involved with and all this. And so his first book was called Tropic of Cancer, and it was so raw because of the language, the swearing, and the sexual content. And this is not to say it's pornographic. It is to say that he does get really raw with it because he's really pushing the boundaries and doesn't care because, he's writing honestly and the characters talk like people would talk in the street. It's one of the only books you're going to find where people are talking like they really do in real life, with tons of slang and everything. So basically the book was like sexually charged, and it was kind of like looked at as dirty. So it was immediately banned in over 82 countries. And you would go to jail in America if you smuggled a copy. So this book became super famous in like France in 1934, right? Then he writes another book about his youth called Black Spring, and it's more about the street. It's about like how the entire world is connected by the street and like living on the street in different times of period where he was on the street and such. So that's Black Spring. And then he finally drops Tropic of Capricorn, and that's what I'm about to read to you now. So that comes out in 1939, a couple weeks before the Nazis invade Europe or invade France. So the Nazis invade, screws everything up. All his books are banned. He runs away to Greece before the Italians invade, travels Greece like an anarchist hobo. The Italians invade. He gets kicked out back to USA, sits down, writes his Greek book. No one will publish it. Travels to the United States during World War II, writes a book called The Air-Conditioned Nightmare. Everybody's freaked out by it because it isn't an ass-kissing portrait of America. It's about the nightmare, The small publisher puts it out with, a handful of copies. So after that, he ends up marrying someone and ends up like in a shack in Big Sur, California, pretty much, where he just spends the next 10 years or so. And then writing his sequels. And he's like this super underground famous in Europe guy, but you can't get his books. So, he's in his late 50s, early 60s. And then someone shows up in his poverty squalor, and it's someone from the book company that put out his stuff a million years ago. And he's like, yo, I got a check for $1 million for you. And Henry Miller didn't think it was real. He thought it was all like a joke. So when he actually finally was like, no, I got to go to the bank and try to cash this, a couple days later, the place had gone bankrupt and he was still poor. He lost out on like $1 million. So then he goes back into obscurity. After a few years, there's a big publishing house owned by this one guy. The guy died of a heart attack and his son took over. And his young son was a Henry Miller devotee. and went and traveled to meet him and said, no, I'm going to give you this amazing book deal. We're going to take your shit to the Supreme Court. We're going to fight for your right to publish your stuff. You're not going to go to jail, et cetera, et cetera. Miller went with it, and he blew up, got ultra famous in the late 60s, and he was already an old man at that point. And then basically he just kept getting bigger and bigger. All his books were selling millions of copies. He was super famous. And then when he was nearly 90, he married a 19-year-old Japanese pop princess. And that's how he kind of ended his life. He was with a Japanese pop princess, being like doing just commentary on different videos and stuff, and then documentaries and such. And then finally he died, I think, in 1980. And he was nearly 90 years old and left behind tons and tons and tons of stuff. So there's all kinds of stuff you can say about him. The thing is, there's never been like really a movie or a TV show based on him that would make him known in pop culture in that big way. There was a movie called Henry and June featuring Fred Ward, Uma Thurman, and the French woman that Bruce Willis is dating in Pulp Fiction, the one with one step out belly, that girl. She plays Anais Nin. Uma Thurman plays Henry Miller's wife, and Fred Ward plays Henry Miller. And it's an okay movie. It doesn't really explain who he is and like all this. It's just kind of like based on their real life stuff. It's kind of art house film. Decent. It's from the early 90s, but it's nothing that's going to make him like a cult classic on the media front. So that's the thing. It's like if anybody out there is a big Henry Miller fan and say you become a director somehow and you make movies, you should make a Henry Miller movie. That's what he needs, because the world sorely needs him once again. But a lot of people find him problematic because of his old school language. And that's debatable. But again, his stuff is coming out in the 1930s, 1940s, 1950s. He's just so far ahead of the pack. And, blah, 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 schmackety. You've listened enough. So I'm going to get to the excerpt now. So this is Tropic of Capricorn. You can find it at bookstores all over the place. And here's how the book opens. And you'll notice I pre-recorded this. But so, yeah. Anyway, Dr. Zeero, take it away from the past. Once you have given up the ghost, everything follows with dead certainty, even in the midst of chaos. From the beginning, it was never anything but chaos. It was a fluid which enveloped me, which I breathed in through the gills. In the substrata, where the moon shone steady and opaque, it was smooth and fecundating. Above it was a jangle and a discord. In everything, I quickly saw the opposite, the contradiction, and between the real and the unreal, the irony, the paradox. I was my own worst enemy. There was nothing I wished to do which I could just as well not do. Even as a child, when I lacked for nothing, I wanted to die. I wanted to surrender because I saw no sense in struggling. I felt that nothing would be proved, substantiated, added, or subtracted by continuing in existence which I had not asked for. Everybody around me was a failure, or if not a failure, ridiculous, especially the successful ones. The successful ones bored me to tears. I was sympathetic to a fault, but it was not sympathy that made me so. It was a purely negative quality, a weakness which blossomed at the mere sight of human misery. I never helped anyone expecting that it would do any good. I helped because I was helpless to do otherwise. To want to change the condition of affairs seemed futile to me. Nothing would be altered, I was convinced, except by a change of heart. And who could change the hearts of men? Now and then a friend was converted. It was something to make me puke. I had no more need of God than he had of me, and if there were one, I often said to myself, I would meet him calmly and spit in his face. What was most annoying was that at first blush, people usually took me to be good, to be kind, generous, loyal, faithful. Perhaps I did possess these virtues, but if it was because I was totally indifferent, I could afford to be good, kind, generous, loyal, and so forth, since I was free of envy. Envy was the one thing I was never a victim of. I have never envied anybody or anything. On the contrary, I have only felt pity for everybody and everything. From the very beginning, I must have trained myself not to want anything too badly. From the very beginning, I was independent in a false way. I had need of nobody because I wanted to be free, free to do and give only as my whims dictated. The moment anything was expected or demanded of me, I balked. That was the form my independence took. I was corrupt, in other words, corrupt from the start. It's as though my mother fed me a poison, and though I was weaned young, the poison never left my system. Even when she weaned me, it seemed that I was completely indifferent. Most children rebel or make a pretense of rebelling, but I didn't give a damn. I was a philosopher when still in swaddling clothes. I was against life on principle. What principle? The principle of futility. Everybody around me was struggling. I never made an effort. If I appeared to be making an effort, it was only to please someone else. At bottom, I didn't give a rap. And if you can tell me why this should have been so, I will deny it, because I was born with a cussed streak in me and nothing can eliminate it. I heard later, when I had grown up, that they had a hell of a time bringing me out of the womb. I can understand that perfectly. Why budge? Why come out of a nice warm place, a cozy retreat in which everything is offered you gratis? The earliest remembrance I have is of the cold, the snow and ice in the gutter, the frost on the window panes, the chill of the sweaty green walls in the kitchen. Why do people live in outlandish climates in the temperate zones, as they are miscalled? Because people are naturally idiots, naturally sluggards, naturally cowards. Until I was about 10 years old, I never realized that there were warm countries, places where you didn't have to sweat for a living, nor shiver and pretend that it was tonic and exhilarating. Wherever there is cold, there are people who work themselves to the bone, and when they produce young, they preach to the young the gospel of work, which is nothing at bottom but the doctrine of inertia. My people were entirely Nordic, which is to say, idiots. Every wrong idea which has ever been expounded was theirs. Among them was the doctrine of cleanliness, to say nothing of righteousness. They were painfully clean, but inwardly they stank. Never once had they opened the door which leads to the soul. Never once did they dream of taking a blind leap into the dark. After dinner, the dishes were promptly washed and put in the closet. After the paper was read, it was neatly folded and laid away on a shelf. After the clothes were washed, they were ironed and folded and tucked away in the drawers. Everything was for tomorrow, but tomorrow never came. The present was only a bridge, and on this bridge they are still groaning, as the world groans, and not one idiot ever thinks of blowing up the bridge. In my bitterness, I often search for reasons to condemn them, the better to condemn myself. For I am like them too, in many ways. For a long while I thought I had escaped, but as time goes on, I see that I am no better, that I am even a little worse, because I saw more clearly than they ever did, and yet remained powerless to alter my life. As I look back on my life, it seems to me that I never did anything of my own volition, but always through the pressure of others. People often think of me as an adventurous fellow. Nothing could be farther from the truth. My adventures were always adventitious, always thrust on me, always endured rather than undertaken. I am of the very essence of that proud, boastful Nordic people who have never had the least sense of adventure, but who nevertheless have scoured the earth, turned it upside down, scattering relics and ruins everywhere. Restless spirits, but not adventurous ones, agonizing spirits, and capable of living in the present. Disgraceful cowards, all of them, myself included. For there is only one great adventure, and that is inward toward the self. And for that, time nor space nor even deeds matter. Once every few years, I was on the verge of making this discovery, but in characteristic fashion, I always managed to dodge the issue. If I try to think of a good excuse, I can only think of the environment, of the streets I knew and the people who inhabited them. I can think of no street in America, or of people inhabiting such a street, capable of leading one on toward the discovery of the self. I have walked the streets in many countries of the world, but nowhere have I felt so degraded and humiliated as in America. I think of all the streets in America combined as forming a huge cesspool, a cesspool of the spirit in which everything is sucked down and drained away to everlasting shit. Over this cesspool, the spirit of work weaves a magic wand. Palaces and factories spring up side by side, and munition plants and chemical works and steel mills and sanatoriums and prisons and insane asylums. The whole continent is a nightmare producing the greatest misery of the greatest number. I was one, a single entity in the midst of the greatest jamboree of wealth and happiness, statistical happiness, but I never met a man who was truly wealthy or truly happy. At least I knew that I was unhappy, unwealthy, out of whack, and out of step. But that was my only solace, my only joy. But it was hardly enough. It would have been better for my peace of mind, for my soul, if I had expressed my rebellion openly, if I had gone to jail for it, if I had rotted there and died. It would have been better if, like the mad Zolgaz, I had shot some good President McKinley, some Gentile insignificant soul like that who had never done anyone the least harm. Because in the bottom of my heart, there was murder. I wanted to see America destroyed, razed from top to bottom. I wanted to see this happen purely out of vengeance, as atonement for the crimes that were committed against me and against others like me who have never been able to lift their voices and express their hatred, their rebellion, their legitimate bloodlust. I was the evil product of an evil soil. If the self were not imperishable, the I write about would have been destroyed long ago. To some, this may seem like an invention, but whatever I imagined to have happened did actually happen, at least to me. History may deny it, since I have played no part in the history of my people, but even if everything I say is wrong, is prejudiced, spiteful, malevolent, even if I am a liar and a poisoner, it is nevertheless the truth, and it will have to be swallowed. So, that was Henry Miller from Tropic of Capricorn. That's the way that book starts. And that's what we're going for on the Dr. Zeero Show today. Do go to goodreads.com, check out Henry Miller, just look him up, read the reviews on his different books. Even the weaker ones in his library are still great pieces of work. It really is true. But when he's on it. So do enjoy, check him out, blah blah blah. And once again, as always, here's a rockin' outro just for you people. Later, kids.